progress.
Are we good? All right. Okay, I'll call the meeting to order at 7 o'clock. I'm Eric Remington, Chairman. Just a reminder, if you speak, please state your name for the audio and for the preparation of minutes. We'd like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is public comment. Is there any public comment in the room? Okay. Anybody on Zoom? Public comment? Anybody there? Okay.
Doing on it.
It's not just you.
It's just.
Okay. All right. So next up on the agenda is the Permanent Building Commission. So we have Kevin Goff with us tonight. Kevin is the chairman of the Permanent Building Commission. He's been a member of that group for decades, right? Yeah. Since we built the high school, at least, right? Since we looked for the land for the high school. Okay. So, so Kevin, I don't know if you want to, you're fine there, or if you want to come up here, wherever you're more comfortable. Kevin expressed to me some thoughts that we might want to look at the charter provisions related to the Permanent Building Commission. There may be some need for clarification of the roles and responsibilities of the Permanent Building Commission and Public Works Department. So I invited him to come and explain to us what he's thinking there, and for us to hear that from Kevin.
Sure. Thank you for having me and expanding the role, because I know it's chapter was not part of the initial chart. So the question comes up as we start, when we start this massive project of looking at the facilities master plan. And as we examine the work that had been done, started, Melissa Mack was here.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Maybe it might be helpful for everybody if you just give a brief overview of what the Permanent Building Commission is, and
Okay.
just as background for everybody.
Okay, so the Permanent Building Commission became the Permanent Building Commission after the high school was built. We were initially the high school building committee. And before that, there were other committees that did building work. This group in particular became permanent at the time that the high school was finished. And we went on to, I believe the next project was the fire station on the County Road. So our group manages all of the contracts for any of the major construction projects that are happening. The renovation of this building, I don't want to say it too loud, but we did the renovation of the library, the addition. We did the high school. We oversaw the renovations of the other schools besides the high school, because we were really wrapped up in that building, and the Public Works Department oversight and all of the contracts for the renovations in McAllister, Spalding, and the old high school. So that was just the way to divide the work so that we could make the most of the dollars at the time. Since then, we've kind of rolled from one project to another, and we have been called in to serve when something is more than just a contract. If the Public Works Department wanted to build the new Public Works storage building, they were able to sign a contract with the company. It was a one signature contract. Came in and they handled the whole thing. We didn't really need to get involved in that. Our involvement was prior to the contract. We looked at a lot of the plans. We looked at a lot of architectural code issues, and we made sure that all of those things were in the contract, so it was manageable. There were surprises were limited. So So that's been our role, is really, when a project comes alive, has funding, has direction, we get called in to then manage it from that point on. Typically, we start by hiring the architect, and then moving on.
So you're appointed by the Board of Selectmen in your body of subject matter experts on building projects.
Correct, correct. So, shame on us, but for 25 years, we could read this document. And each selectman has come through and utilized our group differently, which is normal. When the direction came this time for this major project, it was more that we were in a leadership role using town resources rather than the town was driving the project, we were advising and supporting. So my question is, we're fine with it either way, but I wanted, because this was a new approach, and it was supported in this document to be done that way, I just wanted to be sure that that's how we want to do it. We're fortunate at the moment that we have a really strong group. That may not be true, that may be stronger. But I think we just need to be clear on who reports to me. Do we report to Public Works? Does Public Works report to us? Who is the final, who's the boss? Basically.
So,
Yeah.
Kevin, it's Mike Kingston. I got to interrupt for a moment.
Sure.
So, just two things. One is, you mentioned this last project. Were you talking about the town hall or what last project?
So the project that we're working, there's two projects that we're working on right now. We're working on evaluation of the Babs roller, and we are looking at a concept drawing, trying to come up with a budget to see if we can turn that building into something else more useful than what it is now. We're also at the same time evaluating the facilities master plan, which was done over a 2.5-year period by Tecton Architects. There was a facilities master, I don't even know what their name was. There was a committee that studied the master plan of all the buildings. We didn't know anything about that until it was kind of well underway. We had one of our members in the committee survey on that group and followed through with the planning of all of that. So that's kind of a pretty good example. In this document, it says we're responsible every year to go through the buildings, evaluate them, and issue a report in July on what needs to happen next. We've never done that.
Yeah, so I guess the other comment that I had was, it sounds like you're, I don't want to put words in your mouth, right? But it sounds like what you're asking for is some more specificity around what your role and responsibilities are. Is that kind of what you're getting to?
It is.
Yeah, the other, you had said, not sure really, who you're reporting to. It seems like it's pretty clear that you're reporting to the Board of Selectmen. Right?
Correct.
They're the ones that charge you with doing whatever it is that you do. At least that's the way that I interpret.
In a document like this, I would expect it to say the Board of Selectmen, but the reality is the Board of Selectmen on a day-to-day basis cannot respond to things that happen on a regular basis. So that gets handed down, I would assume, to a Public Works director, who really is managing the project for the Board of Selectmen, so using us for.
So your issue is more, or your comment is really around the day-to-day as opposed to, kind of the overall charge. I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, it's so if I could just say, if our responsibility is on a monthly basis to evaluate the building, we need time to get into the buildings, talk to the people who do it, find out what the problems are. If I'm gonna be able to give a report back to the town on the buildings, of the condition of each building, what the recommendations are for work to be done, seems like that's too far into the weeds for a permanent building commission. That kind of detail should be managed by the people who are in charge of the buildings. Town hall, fire, police, schools, library. It just appears that somebody who's in the building every day will have that knowledge, or be able to report it to us, and then we could react to those reports. So I guess what I'm saying is, we're there to support those people. That's how we function for 25 years.
Thank you.
But Kevin, Riedel, how are you?
Good.
I know I've seen your face before, but I'm wrong. So if you were to build an organization chart that made the most sense of who reported to who and who needed to know what, and who had the best oversight and expertise, say, to you or your department to report through, what would that be?
So I would say the Board of Selectmen has a group of managers, and those are divided by schools, fire, police, library, senior center, whatever the buildings are, town hall. Whoever is in charge of those buildings, maintaining them day to day, really must have much better knowledge than I'll ever have by walking through once in a while. I believe that the town uses a ticketing system whenever there's a, I'm gonna call it a complaint or a need for repair. That ticketing system, I would assume, could generate reports to say, we keep getting reports about the air conditioning going down, or the police station can't maintain heat. That's when I would believe that the person in charge of, right now, could be the public works director. That person would call in a contractor and try to fix the problem with the normal money within a maintenance budget. If that, I'm gonna call it a heating system, if that heating system goes down, let's say at school, it's November, that'll be fixed right away. That's when I think they would call us in to say, we need to get a spec out, redesign, or installation, repair, that we would jump in support of that goal to get that bid process started to get the job done.
Versus a cold walkthrough by
Right.
your PVC.
Right,
folks.
and I don't think, and according to this, it's kind of within our purview, the way this is written out, the way I interpret it, is that if I decide, or we decide, we need a new school, my job is to come back and say, you need to build a new school. Now I'm looking for money, I'm looking for direction, I'm looking for all of that stuff. But I don't think we're the right people to say, you need to start a school.
Have you or anybody on your committee proposed new language or modified language to this yet?
I'm gonna be honest with you, this whole thing started as an innocent conversation as Eric and I were walking through one of the buildings and saying, I said, you know, we need to get an RFP out for heating and ventilation units at the high school. And we have a strict deadline because of the lead time of the equipment. So Eric and I have been working back and forth, and I keep checking to say, like, do we have this yet? Do we have this yet? And I feel like I shouldn't be nagging anybody, you know, and I want to get it done. My role is to make sure that the grant money that was provided to the town doesn't disappear because we couldn't get going. So it becomes a responsibility, and maybe I oversee it, I overstep it, but it becomes a responsibility that I see the big picture of how we get from where we are to where we can finish and turn on the air conditioning. There's a lot of steps in between, and right now the town doesn't seem to have a good flow for who's doing what.
Right.
You know? So when I read this and I said, I guess I'm supposed to do that. And yet, I'm not going to say it, I don't want you to take this wrong, but as a volunteer, I this is a full-time job.
And putting the onus on some of these managers of each of these departments, that I think facilitate things better.
Correct. So I think Board of Selectmen, Public Works Director, School Facility Director, let's because we split everything in the top. If those guys can't handle it on a normal contract basis, if it's more than just full West Side Oil, because, the service that's not working, they would then put together a proposal about what they think they need, and we would look at it, we would help them. The high school floor right now is being renovated, it's being sanded and refinished. There was a thought before we got involved that floor had to be replaced. That was the alternative. Just because we had a connection with somebody who came in and took some core samples, we found out that we could extend the life of that floor at least one more cycle by refinishing that and replacing it. So that cooperation worked. And that's the way it should be. That's what we're here for. We have 8 people, architects, engineers, people in the building industry, some retired people. But we've been doing this long enough that we may not be able to give you the answer of the snap of a finger, but we pretty much know how to get to the answers and want to go from there.
I just have one more thought. If the language in your chapter 91 here for rebuilding commission is changed, does that kind of initiate changes to other language in other departments of our charter?
I don't know.
So
That's why you guys.
yeah, that's something to be considered.
Yeah, I agree. And listen, this document has worked fine for at least 25 years.
That's what nobody wants.
Yeah, and maybe it'll work fine no matter what you do.
Right.
But I guess all I wanted to know is, are we as a town leaning a very important function in taking care of all this real estate? Are we leaning too much on a volunteer group, or should that be a paid position? Really focused on it. That's kind of where it's at. We're fortunate right now we have a volunteer group that will do it. I just don't know from the perspective of this kind of a document, that's wise.
Thank you, that's good information.
Any other questions?
No, I don't think so.
If I could just sum it up, I think we function best in an advisory role to the people who take care of the buildings. And we shouldn't be the people who take care of the buildings. We've consolidated quite a bit, and I think we're at the point where pretty soon it's gonna happen to the volunteers.
And just excuse my ignorance, how many people are on the program?
Is a, we've been together for a long time.
Well, thank you.
6 and
Yeah,
2 alternates.
6 and 2 all.
Two alternates,
Hey, Chris.
But I mean, when you think about it, if you look at all the buildings we have, the replacement cost of all those buildings is hundreds of millions of dollars. So, to provide the oversight for those projects or new projects, maintenance of those facilities, maintaining the value, and making sure that we have what we need going forward, and that's a huge job.
It's a huge job just to do the annual report that's specifically outlined. That would take weeks work to get to a point where you accumulate enough information. We need to have an annual report. So that data has to come down from the people who use the building. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thanks.
You too.
You're welcome to stay, but we won't feel slighted.
I will stay.
Okay. All right. Okay, so next on the agenda, so we've talked about with the changes that we've been asked to make, talking to some of our former first selectmen. We talked to Colin, the current first selectman, but we thought it would be good to get the perspective of some former first selectmen. So we've invited all the former first selectmen, and I did have a text exchange with Melissa Mack. She was not able to be here tonight. She did refer me to her remarks from the last Charter Revision Commission, which I've not had a chance to hold, but we can go back and look at that. And Scott Felter is actually out of town, was not able to make it tonight. But we do have Ed McEnany and Tom Fernay, both former first selectmen. So you're welcome to come up here. If you're more comfortable there, you're welcome to stay there. I'll leave it up to you guys, but
I can stay here.
okay. Yeah, the microphone picks up just fine. So, I mean, there was no particular reason, but I did put you on the agenda first, Ed. So, we've been charged with, I think we talked about that, we've been asked to look at taking the town clerk, tax collector, and the treasurer and making those appointed positions rather than elected positions that they are today. So I think, we'd be interested in your perspective in working with those positions, filling those positions as the first selectman, and any what your experience was in working with those roles, and any perspective you have on challenges of managing other elected officials when it's an interesting role because you're responsible for the overall administration of the town, but they're elected just like you are. So I think we'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that.
Sure. So that has always been a tension, if you will, which is the last thing that you mentioned, which is between trying to manage an individual who's separately elected. Now, I've been fortunate in, I don't recall difficulty in that regard, but just the nature of the arrangement caused me to think about it at the time. And we were generally fortunate that those individuals, at least at the time that I was in office, were competent and honest individuals, so to say. But there's a from my perspective, there's sort of a philosophical counterpoint to that, which is if one were to make them all appointed rather than elected, it would, I think, change the character of our town government and move it more in the direction, which I don't think is the direction, certainly not a direction that I want it to go in, more in the direction of sort of a town council almost kind of a government like Enfield, because that would consolidate authority more in the Board of Selectmen, really, by default. I mean, Kevin was just talking about, who he's working for and how that was all going to play out. And from a philosophical perspective, I'm not a fan, even though that's often been an issue. So it's sort of a separate issue. But at the same time, there's the counterpoint or the concern about individuals who are elected and whether or not, again, they're honest and they're competent. So, I thought about it from the perspective of election or not election. I'm sort of coming down on the elected side, continued elected side, provided that there was some safety valve, perhaps in the Board of Selectmen, to remove those, even though they're elected individuals, if they turn out to be incompetent or corrupt in some fashion, not honest, if you want to. Again, fortunately, that didn't happen to me, but also from a competency perspective, 1, 2, 3, there's a bit of a learning curve for each of those positions, and you can probably ill afford to have someone in the position who's got no experience, even though he or she might be elected to it. So that's why, and then there's a related thing about if the charter were to grant authority over those positions and other similarly situated elected positions, there'd have to be some ability to appoint someone to the position, perhaps even a sort of a technocrat kind of a person until the next election in the Board of Selectmen. So, I thought about it a while. I just don't want to get into, I just don't want to make it on a day-to-day basis look like a town manager form of government, where it's not only consolidated in Board of Selectmen, but more to the point, consolidated in the first selectman in terms of those issues. Certainly from the treasurer's perspective, or from the treasury or the involvement of the finance department, certainly the first selectman has a big role to play, as we all know, in terms of things that go on there. I wouldn't want him to be, or she, to then have control over the issue of who's the treasurer kind of thing. And I'm not sure I would consolidate those jobs. In the same fashion, the other positions that you mentioned have statutory obligations that would have to be fulfilled. And for the philosophical reason that I mentioned earlier, I prefer them to be filled by an elected person, subject to the ability to remove someone for incompetence or corruption. And the ability in the Board of Selectmen to appoint someone, at least for the balance of the term of that individual.
And it's Mike Gaines, just a question. I guess I should have asked this of Colin when he addressed us on this issue a few weeks back. But during your term, I'm assuming that you had some type of performance appraisals done with those three positions, or at least those two positions, right? That I believe there was some responsibility to have. So I guess my question is, assuming you had those performance appraisals, what was that generally like with an elected official as opposed to someone that's appointed?
Well, I have to say, Mike, that the people I dealt with in those positions didn't take it amiss, okay, that we were sitting down and talking about my views about what they were doing and how they could do it better. That doesn't mean that might not happen in the future, right? Hey, I'm elected too. Why should I listen to you? Yeah, I'll talk to you, but don't give me too much of a hard time. You get the idea. I'm sure that's the genesis of your question. But I was fortunate. I don't know about Tom, but I was fortunate at the time that I was there and talking to these people, and I worked with them closely, obviously. Being in the building and also dealing with them in various ways, over their jobs. So I was fortunate in the seeing them on a frequent basis, or talking to them or talking about their job, on a regular basis. And they didn't have their noses out of joint because we were sort of giving a performance evaluation, but query whether or not it was of any use, unless they internalized it and said, well, I ought to think about what Ed just said about something, They didn't have to pay any heed to what I was saying because they were elected, So.
Ed.
Yeah, great.
I'm not texting anybody. I have my questions actually written on my phone here.
Okay, by me, right?
All that guy's doing is texting on his phone. Actually, my thoughts I wrote down on my phone. So you hit a key point that I was concerned about. And what I wrote is who's the best persons to judge if any of these three positions are not performing well. What recourse or disciplinary action can be taken for non-performers or abusers of their position? And I think you said exactly key couple of words, safety valve. And I'm not sure we have one now. These three positions, I know them personally. I think they do a good job. I believe they do a good job, each one of them. But if we did have someone that was non-performing, how really would the town know that? I mean, so versus, hey, this person has been in town forever, I graduated high school with them, and I think they're a good performer, I haven't heard anything bad about them. But how would the townspeople really know if somebody was a bad performer, and what recourse does the inner workings of the government of Suffield have if somebody were a bad, kind of a bad nut?
Well, how does the town, so at least two questions there raised, I hear. So how would the town know? I'm not sure it's the town that needs to know, okay? It's probably the Board of Selectmen, the way I would envision it. So that would probably come through the first selectman saying, hey, we've got a problem here. You know, talking to his fellow selectmen, we've got a problem here with, for whatever reason, whatever the reason is. Not just because we don't get along or they don't, you know, they're not cheery on Mondays or something like that, but, you know, a fundamental problem. Either they don't know where they're going, they push on doors marked full, or, you know, whatever it is, just because they're elected. Or they've got a problem with they're taking money or whatever, okay? I think it would probably come from the first selectman who sees these folks on an almost daily basis and is also involved in what they're doing from a budgetary perspective, can be from a budgetary perspective, and from just a functioning perspective as well. And then, so now that I've gone on about that, what was your other question? Oh, how would the town know? That was that question. And then,
No, that was more of a statement than a question.
right,
The
okay.
town wouldn't know.
Okay, yeah, I mean, oh, and how would you address it? My recollection is in the charter, there's a provision that says that the Board of Selectmen can remove probably, I don't know, some individuals, maybe board and commission members or something like that after an opportunity for a hearing. So this, of course, would be much more serious, right? So now the question is, how would you do it? Well, I don't have a mechanism in mind, but I would think it would include some sort of a discussion with the individual involved before a vote by the Board of Selectmen would have to be taken in what I envision. And, you know, the town attorney's right behind me. He may say, that's a bad idea, but nevertheless, you see what I'm saying? I mean, you have to give these people a hearing, even if the first selectman comes to his fellow selectmen and say, we got a problem with the fill in the blank because of incompetence or because I think they're taking money or something along those lines.
Any thoughts, Derek, on how that would work?
Sure.
If you move somebody that was obviously underperforming or, you know, did something awful.
Yeah, so they're moving the camera around the building, so I feel very honored. They have there's a Supreme Court case, Connecticut Supreme Court case from 1985 called Simmons versus Canby, that essentially said that a town cannot, unless a town was specifically given the power to do so by the legislature, a town cannot remove an elected official. So there are no recall provisions in Connecticut, but for those 5 towns that were specifically granted that power by the legislature. So unless we're one of those, which we are not, right? We don't have that option. So what towns have done historically is had a very public censure process where an elected official has committed some form of wrongdoing, where whatever the executive authority or lead municipal body, such as the Board of Selectmen, would vote to censure that person and essentially, as Ed put it, give them an opportunity to address those charges in public, like a hearing, and then censure, and then from there either refer to, you know, whatever appropriate authority there is. So in some towns that's typically done to the Ethics Commission. In Suffield, anyone can file an ethics complaint against a elected official, and that goes to the Ethics Commission for review. The Ethics Commission has a closed-door process to review the complaint, and if they deem that it is worthy of investigation, then they open a formal ethics investigation after that. So all that process is spelled out in
ordinances. So that's one option, but that doesn't require the Board of Selectmen to do that. That can be done by anyone. On the flip side, the Board of Selectmen can also recommend that the Ethics Commission look at it and essentially start that process on their own. And that's what a lot of other towns have done. When things have been more serious, there are a few examples out there where municipal boards have referred the matter to local law enforcement or something along those lines. I would think that would not be, again, would not be required to go through a hearing process. If somebody caught an elected official stealing, and had credible authority of that, they would have to, I think they would have an ethical duty to refer that to law enforcement right away, and that would have to go through that process as well, maybe in conjunction with a public censure. I think the hard part, I think former First Selectman McEnany hits the nail on the head here. It's really not spelled out well as to what should be done. So, I think I said this to you early on, but I sort of have a list of areas in the charter that could probably use some time, and this is one of them. We should have spelled out a public censure process if there is a problem, so that when one comes up, it's very clear to whoever the elected official accused is, because really they have fundamental rights to a hearing, and that should be spelled out in the charter. And then just one last point, I guess, because it did come up. We do have that in the charter with respect to the removal of appointed boards and commission members, and that is spelled out. In my, as far as I can remember, I can't think of a time where that's ever been used. And that's probably going back, I would say I've been pretty involved in town government since I was on the Board of Finance and I don't know, Tom could probably say what year that was, 2005 or so. So I can't think of well, I'll say in the last 20 years, I can't think of a time where that's been used.
Actually, it was used once,
Oh,
when I recall that.
yeah, so one time then.
So I've been around town for my life basically, and I can only recall one instance where the first selectman was actually had some transgression, maybe the old timers in the room, like me, can recall that involved sand, and that was probably 50 years ago. And I'm not sure what all kind of came of that, but I'm sure that person was not reelected.
And it's worth noting that I think the other thing that's interesting is the charter has changed dramatically in the last 50 years. And the most recent version of the charter is probably the most similar to when we went from 3 members of the Board of Selectmen to 5, which, and I think you wrote that charter. I mean, I want to say that was probably early, mid-90s, something like that.
Yeah.
But we're pretty much, we haven't had a major issue like that required hearing that I can remember, and may be able to detail that other one. So it's largely untested, and I think there is some room for improvement of that. Like I said, the charter has lots of room for improvement, so.
The process is there is a process.
There is.
There's a process.
Elected
No, not for elected officials, for appointed officials.
Well, there is a process for elected officials, the ethics refers.
Yeah, and to Derek's point, I wasn't familiar with the 1985 case, but I'm in favor of clarifying that as much as we can. And the very prospect of a public hearing, for example. I don't know, Derek, could it be public regardless of the desire of the individual? Or would it have to be, under freedom of information, would it have to be confidential?
Yeah, it's a great question, because, so.
Just
what
making
Ed's
it up
what
as
Ed's
they go
referring
along.
to is if you have an employee matter,
Right.
you could hold that in executive session,
Right.
subject to the consent of the employee. So the employee could say, no, I want this heard in public session. It's a great, I don't know the answer to whether that would apply to an elected official. It's a great question I'd have to look into.
So-
I would think, I don't know, I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but I'd have to look at that.
So the point I'm driving to, that's why I asked Derek, is that the process itself could end up rectifying the situation because of the public opprobrium brought about if you make an accusation against someone, which is supported, obviously, by the Board of Selectmen, about incompetence or corruption. That's why I asked that question about, because as he pointed out, and as I alluded to, certain things are required to be in an executive session when it deals with personnel matters, but as he correctly points out, that's for someone who's an employee as opposed to an elected official. Not sure it applies to the elected officials. Trying to think now, but I believe the board or commission chairman who was sacked back whenever it was, after a hearing, after an opportunity for a hearing, was appointed as opposed to elected, if I remember correctly. Yes, he was appointed. Anyhow, so that's what I'm thinking. I mean, I like just to sum up, I like the idea from my perspective, as I said to you, philosophically, about electing people, because I don't want us to go too far down the road of looking like a, what do you call it, town manager, town council form of government. I know other people disagree with me, but that's my story and I'm sticking to it. But I think that's an issue with respect to those elected officials that needs to be addressed in some fashion, and maybe clarifying it in the charter would be a good way to do that.
There, it's Mike Haynes. Question, I mean, this charter is 290 some odd pages long. Would you be able to get us a couple of sections that are relevant to what we're just talking about as far as the process for elected officials?
Sure.
Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, I can send an email to everyone about, where things are. I have that all for
Thank you.
no problem at all. And I will just say, I did just look it up, the wording in the executive session definition of FOI is public officer or employee. So I think public officer would include elected officials. But it's interesting because and this is where I think the case law, the relevant commission decisions are probably important to look at. The executive session allows them to opt out of the executive session. If it was noticed in public, I would think that there's no counter to that, at least written in the statute. So they can't opt into executive session, if that makes sense. And we would have to look at it, but on something like that, I mean, appropriate wording in the charter, there are times where a charter can prohibit, a charter can provide more restrictions than what's available at state law, just not less, right? So we, theoretically, one can say a censure hearing has to be in public based on the charter of the town. Again, I'll couch that all with, I'd want to look at that in a little more detail, but I think that provides, some guidance here.
Let me, if I can ask you, sorry guys, come in and take it over, but a thought, there's a general, as I recollect, there's general Supreme Court authority to the effect that a town can structure its government any way it wants, okay, and there you are. How does that affect this other case that you were talking about from 85? I mean, does the 85, because of the specificity of it, does it seem to override the ability of the town to say, well, we want to structure it this way, and it includes the removal of, by the Board of Selectmen of somebody who's, been sort of found guilty, for want of a better way to describe it?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've read the case, but my recollection is the case, the state of Connecticut enacted a home rule statute for towns sometime in the late 1940s, early 1950s.
Right.
The analysis under that case was whether, under the home rule statute, a town could pass a law that allowed it to recall an elected official. And the Supreme Court said, no, it cannot. The only ones that can recall an elected official were towns that were specifically granted that power prior to the enactment of the Home Rule Statute. Because the Home Rule Statute said if you exist as a town, you can carry forward with all of the powers that we've given to you. Anyone else, or anyone who's starting a new town, anyone who's reincorporating and changing their charter, you have to, you're subject to the Home Rule Statute and then laid out, what the minimum requirements are there. It's one of the reasons why our police commission and fire commission have so many problems with the special acts that created them
Right.
versus what is provided for in the statutes, and that's been a constant struggle with us on a charter revision standpoint for
Right.
70 years. So.
Right.
I'd like to make sure we get time for Tom.
Right.
So, Tom, another former first selectman, and he's been an active participant in our meetings, attending our meetings and providing public comment, but I wanted to give him the opportunity as a former first selectman to offer his thoughts on the subject at hand. So I'll turn the floor over to you, Tom.
Thank you. Couple things. I made some comments in previous meetings. I won't repeat them here. Just as a reminder, I'm related to the town treasurer, so I have some biases there. But two things. In the discussion you had earlier about the Permanent Building Commission, one thing to keep in mind is how screwed up things were 25 years ago when we built the high school and didn't keep good records and didn't have a good process of dealing with reimbursements from the state for that construction, and we still haven't finished that. I mean, that's still an open issue here 20-something years later. So just, figure that into the discussion too. I don't know how much you guys have had to deal with it since, but.
Not at all.
Okay, well, that's good for you.
We didn't even know,
Yeah.
quite honestly, that it was an
Okay,
issue.
just as a point of information to add to that, because it really, we didn't do it well 25 years ago, and not doing it well continues to be a problem. I think one of the things that Mr. McEnany said that I want to add to is that the current way the town is organized in terms of authorities can be very confusing, not only to the participants in the government, but the citizens in town that elect the government and the people that get hired to work in town. And Ed alluded to that, or Derek alluded to that, talking about fire and police commission and the issues that have come up over the years because of the legislation that got them started. But we also have issues with WPCA. We've had some issues with where the library authority is or isn't because of state laws and so on. So as a former first selectman, I didn't know much of that when I got elected, and I had to learn it. And it was not simple because boards and commissions also have what they think are authority to do things, not just the ones that I just mentioned, but some of the others. And it isn't always very clear where those lines are. And, sometimes, and many town employees also look at the Board of Selectmen and say, hey, they're elected, well, we can outlast them, no matter what they say, good or bad or whatever. But, we'd have to protect our own territory because we're going to be here longer term. At least that was kind of the general thought among a fair number of town employees. On the other hand, we've got, 6 or 7 different unions at the schools and 6 or 7 in the town. The part of the reason for that is because the relationship between the management in town and the workers in town hasn't always been good, and people decide to organize and defend what they think, what they want for their jobs. So that turned out, one of my first experiences as first selectman was dealing with about 5 contracts that expired in 1 year. That's a hard thing to do first time through for anybody. And much of what the first selectman does is something you really can't talk to the rest of the town about. Union negotiations, some of the budgeting stuff happens, a lot of it happens behind the scenes. The HR stuff all happens behind the scenes. So there's a lot that you can't even really talk about publicly that you still have to do. And it takes a fairly large amount of time for whoever the first selectman is, whether you've got a board of selectmen that helps you or hurts you, or whatever, or board of finance. So just, keep that in mind. The town is not simple in terms of the authorities between boards and commissions and employees and management and whatever. It can be very difficult. One of the other difficulties is that just from a getting somebody to run for office point of view, the first selectman's job in particular is a full-time job. I mean, it maybe wasn't 25 or 30 years ago, but it is today. I mean, it's very hard to do that job correctly and do outside employment. So you either have to be not in the middle of a career or retired, but probably not in the middle 25 years of whatever your career is, because you can't afford to take a job that may only last 2 years. And even if you do it well, it might only last 2 years. And so that's also something to think about as you think about which jobs should be elected, which ones should be employees. And to me, that suggests a move, as I've said before, more towards a town manager, or town administrator or something, and having a first selectman whose job is not the day-to-day CEO job, but the day-to-day, but would have the policy job to run the board of selectmen, set policy and so on, rather than and have a hired person that does the day-to-day. So I just wanted to introduce that into your thinking. And just overall, and where you go from here, I would say I would encourage you to get to the point where you guys are as unanimous as you can about what you recommend to the Board of Selectmen. Because it's always difficult to get changes through a referendum and a vote by the town, no matter whether it's, in September or November or whatever. The more you, as a group, can put together something you all can live with and support, the better off you'll be at making that the better off you'll get at the Board of Selectmen agreeing with you and putting it forward to the voters. In the past, I've seen in town, in charter commissions, I've seen the Board of Selectmen basically said, well, we won't take responsibility for and agree with this, but we'll give it to the voters anyhow. And I've also seen the Board of Selectmen say, we don't like any of those ideas, so we're not going to pass any of them on. And I think, Eric, you've seen that both ways. And that's a bad thing also, because I think if you can't get both this group and the Board of Selectmen to pretty close to unanimously agree to put something forward to the voters, that's not a good sign. So just as another thing to think about.
So just,
Yep.
I appreciate your thoughts on town manager. We haven't been charged with that. And I don't want to speak for the committee, and I don't know that there's an appetite to go there. So if we don't go there, what are your thoughts on these three positions and whether they should remain elected or become appointed?
I think for now, I'd say keep them where they are. I mean, I don't see any obvious reason to make a change. I think Colin is correct to say long-term that, they're not going to be there forever. And it's important to make sure that we get people in those positions that are qualified. And theoretically, that the election process and the hiring process should both bring qualified candidates. Might not, I agree, it might not. And, well, whatever, I'll just leave it at that. I don't, if that answered your question well enough.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Kaplan, I have a follow-up to that, you just kind of touched on it a little bit. The recent past, a lot of these positions have run unopposed, election cycle after election cycle. We've been very lucky that people who have run are certified and intelligent and committed to the town, which bodes very well for us. But I wonder, both your thoughts, Tom and Ed, if you want to go back to Ed, on a concern that the elected process is really, it's one individual that has come back over and over again, and are we missing an opportunity to look for other individuals who, if our certified individual as town clerk or treasurer leaves their position, and somebody comes in to nominate themselves to be on the election ballot, and they are not certified, what are our recourses to ensure that we have a good person, the best person in these roles?
Well, that's a difficult question, actually, because at least as far as the tax collector and the town clerk have been concerned, there's been sort of a general person's agreement in town for a long time that the tax collector would be a Republican and the town clerk would be a Democrat, and largely run unopposed, although that's not necessarily true of the treasurer's office. So there's no, I'm not sure there's a stomach for changing that, but to your point, that's why I think that possibility is why I think there ought to be that safety valve, maybe different now based on what Derek has said regarding that case and so on and so forth. But that's a concern, certainly. That being said, you know, generally I've found the quality of the individuals who ended up being elected into the job to be good, or in the alternative, they would come in with a recognition that they needed to do a lot to get up to speed pretty quickly. And those people have generally done what they need to do. So, you know, I guess that's my approach to it. That's sort of like crossing your fingers for luck from the, you know, that it'll turn out okay. But unfortunately, I don't see another alternative if you keep the position elected, because I believe the only qualification, if you want to call it that, for elected positions is that you are an elector, you're a resident of town, and you're a voter, I think. Yes, I think those are the two. Derek, have I got that right? So that's it. Okay, you can't put, there are no other restrictions that one can put on it. So that's the risk you have. But from my perspective, that's an acceptable risk, again, provided there's some sort of safety valve. It's an acceptable risk to try and continue with the type of government that has served us well over the hundreds of years, and not go down that road, which I've always opposed, despite the fact that Tom sort of cheerleaded for it, which I've always opposed, because in my view, it's more important for the people of the town to be able to govern themselves rather than hiring it out. And that's my general view on it, you know, hiring it out to someone else who's going to be the fill in the blank, the town manager or whatever, who's not even from here. So that's always been, again, it's sort of philosophical, but that's the risk you run when you have an elected official. Tom may have a different take on it.
Generally agree with how Ed described it. I mean, I think what we've really experienced in town for the time that I've been here is that people in the tax collector's office and town clerk have been very good, and they know enough about town. They lived in town. They are trusted by people. They're not seen as partisan in how they do their job, and they've all lived up to that. And so that's why I think that, generally speaking, in the past, that there haven't been challenges to those. And you know, it's a good question to ask. And would it be better if there were more competition there? Maybe, could be. But I think being able to pick some of those people directly is a good thing. The bigger the town gets and the more complicated it gets, the less that argument holds water in some ways. And that's the, that's kind of the view in my mind about whether you move towards town manager, town administrator, or what is the town. I mean, things are definitely more complex for the first selectman today than it was when I was there 15 years ago. It's much different. There's much more going on, and town residents are more attuned to what's going on. There's a lot more information, good and bad, that circulates in town, accurate or not accurate, and that's a problem. And it's always been a problem in town since we're not a major city. We don't get good coverage from independent media, basically. And the town has to do a lot of its own singing about what it's doing. The only one other thing I wanted to mention is discussion earlier that Derek was involved in about the Ethics Commission as a tool to use if you run into issues with poor performers, I guess I'll just say it that way, is that I don't think the ethics code that we have is very strong. It's much more focused on disclosing financial conflicts than it is in dealing with other kinds of ethical issues. So that might be something to think about as you look for how to, I'll call it plug that hole or to deal with that problem. Take a close look, because there was a change made, I want to say in 2010 or 12 or somewhere in there to the ethics code that I thought at the time was not in a positive direction, I'll put it that way. But I haven't gone back and looked at it since. I just wanted to say that. And the other thing is that the first selectman and board of selectmen does have some control over those elected positions by way of the budget and the reimbursement that they get for being an elected official. They have cut and added at different times in different ways depending on performance. And so there is something there to use as leverage if you have somebody in one of those roles that is not doing well or hasn't gotten the certification they need for the job. And that means you can start with less and you can give more if they successfully pass for the town clerk and the tax collector what they need to do to get certified. So anyway.
Just a point which I'd like to underscore. I wouldn't tie, if there's going to be a safety valve kind of arrangement, even if you can't remove someone, I wouldn't tie it to the ethics code and say, if you violate something in the ethics code, we can censure you. I think that should be independent of the ethics code, because regardless of how strong or weak that might be, I think the Board of Selectmen would have to have flexibility in determining that an elected official, one of the three that you mentioned, has done something he or she shouldn't do. I mean, say, well, you shouldn't have taken that money out of the till, that was unethical. I mean, that's just silly, it's illegal too, but that's separate. So I don't think that you should be tied into that ethics code. Sure, you could use it as a reason, but I don't envision that as being necessarily strong enough to bring somebody to task about either their performance as in knowledge or competence, and also whether or not there's corruption, there's some sort of corruption.
If I could just add on the last point, because I think it is important, and I think both Tom and Ed make very good points about the ethics commission, which can coexist, right? The ethics ordinance is not strong enough, and it is not clear enough, okay? And I think that should be revamped. It's something I've talked about quite a bit since I've been town attorney.
But that's an ordinance, not a charter.
That's correct. At the same time, the ethics commission is, and should remain independent. So while I think it's appropriate for the Board of Selectmen to refer an ethical violation to the Ethics Commission, that should be no more, the Board of Selectmen should have that ability no more than any resident of Suffield who can file that complaint as well and let the Ethics Commission go through their investigatory process. So I just want to point that out. Both of those points are very good, and I think they are both very true.
But that would be separate from a censure hearing
Yes.
held by the Board of Selectmen.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
And that's why I do think, kind of to circle all the way back around, I do think the most appropriate thing is to have something spelled out in the charter about how to go through a censure process for for any town official. And I think, and I'll send over what the code says about, or what the charter says about the investigatory powers of the Board of Selectmen, because I think it's important for you to look at in considering what else can be put in there.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Just had a follow-up question for Tom, which I think would be really quick. Even though I know you said you don't know if there's an appetite to look at the town manager, I just wanted to clarify so that I understand. Tom, you had mentioned something, that if there was a move to a town manager or an administrator, they would really work on the day-to-day functioning of the town, but that there would be a first selectman that would still do the policy work with the Board of Selectmen, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so, because I guess my understanding was that a town manager or administrator would replace a first selectman, but you're thinking you could still have both potentially.
Can be, yeah, I mean, yeah.
There are some towns that do that?
Yeah.
Thank you, I didn't know that.
Just one final thought on that, if I may just jump in. From my perspective, a lot of times administrators or town managers become the policy setters by default, even if you have a first selectman, or you have a board of selectmen, or you have a town council, because they dictate the agenda, okay? And they say, well, we need to address this, and here's how we're going to address it. Here's how, what I would suggest is we're going to address it. As opposed to a situation that we have now. So now we're moving more towards the sort of government by experts kind of a thing, where they, and that's drawn a lot of opprobrium, certainly on the federal level, because a lot of these administrators are sort of making laws almost, okay, by the policy that they set. And that's one of the things that concerns me about going in the direction of a, of a town manager kind of arrangement, okay? Because it will, just by force of circumstance, maybe not originally or immediately, but over time, it will become more a government of technocrats rather than a government of the people. And I find the latter, as difficult as it may be at times, government by the people, to be something that's important that we maintain, and that people in Suffield continue to be involved in their town, in the way their town runs. So, sorry, Tom, but just wanted to let you know my thoughts on it.
I appreciate it.
I'm not sorry.
Well, that's good.
Sorry. I apologize, but I have another commitment I have to leave for. I've zoomed in, so Ray as vice chairman is going to take over. I'll be on the phone. So, sorry.
Ray, you need your markers.
Ed and Tom, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Really good input. And Kevin, you as well. Learned quite a lot tonight. There's no other interviews scheduled for tonight. The next is on the agenda, we're going to discuss the status of the commission's work to date. So we've, just to kind of review, we've had several meetings. Liz, thanks for joining us live for our fifth and full member. We appreciate you coming on the commission.
Happy to serve.
And so you probably have gotten up to speed as well as you can?
Pretty much.
Okay.
A few more conversations and I'll feel totally up to speed, but I've talked to several people who provided me, so
Okay, great.
feeling pretty good.
So we've interviewed all three positions. We've reviewed the, I think we first interviewed the tax collector, we've interviewed the treasurer, and we've interviewed the town clerk last week. And we've got some really good input. They came very well prepared with some breakdowns of what other towns are doing and whether those positions are elected or appointed. They gave their opinions on what they thought we should do or continue to do in the future. So it was all good input. We've also had interviewed last week Colin Lowell, and tonight Ed and Tom were interviewed to get their input as well. So we've really I think the commission probably has learned a lot about the pros and cons of making these three positions elected or appointed. And I think we've all kept kind of an open mind, hearing all the input. And we've also come to consider many other things that we just probably didn't think of before, given that input by the three elected officials and by the selectmen as well. So we're going to kind of consolidate our thoughts and present that to the Board of Selectmen as it's kind of a status update this coming Wednesday. Anybody need to add anything from the committee? Well, I got through that. Okay.
Will you and, actually, I do have a question. Will you and Eric do the consolidating based on past meeting discussions?
Yeah, I think all of us will
Okay.
have input for that consolidated.
Okay.
That statement, right. So, discuss presentations in Board of Selectmen on August 21st. That's basically what we're going to do, is kind of summarize what I just kind of summarized for everybody here. But obviously it'll be on paper, and we're going to give our thoughts to the Board of Selectmen. I think initially the date was supposed to be August 21st when we wrapped all of this up and gave our final thoughts and recommendations. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think Eric had already talked to Colin that the best we're going to do by the 21st, given we had some problems with a member dropping out and bringing on a new member, and meetings being official or not official, depending on how we were staffed, I guess, for the commission. So we were definitely prepared to get a status update this coming Wednesday, and hopefully also come to some type of time frame where we can wrap this up and give a final recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, and obviously have them make the decision on it. Any public comment?
Thank you. Annie Hornish, 864 Thrall. Incompetence and corruption were brought up in the context of elected officials. And I feel that for incompetence, for example, the accountability is every 2 years, on election day. Regarding corruption, there's other methods to hold people accountable. If crimes or laws are being broken, the police and the courts can be a remedy. There's professional codes of ethics that can be applied. The one thing about corruption, please consider that the Ethics Commission is extremely limited in its scope here in Suffield, and they also rarely meet. If you go look at their meeting minutes, it's a rare event, and they're currently, I think, too weak to be able to curtail, say, bad behavior in town by elected and appointed officials. Also, if you decide to create a mechanism for censure, the direction of the censure should be bidirectional. So there has to be a method in place not only from the Board of Selectmen down to other positions, but also for the first selectman or Board of Selectmen members. Mr. Remington mentioned that, this board was not charged with recommending a town manager. Per state law, you do have the ability to review the entire charter, not just what the first selectman asked you to do. with regard to the 3 positions, and I know you're aware of that, I just want to reiterate. And one final comment, if the town manager is pursued, probably the salary of the first selectman should be eliminated, because it's going to be going into the town manager if that happens. That's all I have.
Thank you, thank you. Right, Tom?
Barry, I had a question about your comments just before the public session. How are you gonna decide what to present to the Board of Selectmen next week? I mean, it sounded like you and Eric were gonna, as chairman and vice chairman, we're gonna bubble on that and put something together? Is that how that's gonna work? And you said something about working with the whole board, so I guess I'm saying maybe that ought to be a public meeting to have that discussion.
Yeah, my preference would be to involve, obviously, the entire commission, not just myself and Eric. That would be
Okay.
not
Good.
something that I would recommend.
Okay, so it's not something you'll do by email or telephone offline, you do that at a meeting?
Absolutely.
Okay, and the other thing is, so that means you still, before you recommend action to the Board of Selectmen, you'll at least have a scheduled public hearing on whatever the recommendation will be, and then you'll go to the Board of Selectmen.
I think that would be.
Is that right?
Okay.
Well, I don't think that we have, I'm sorry, just to jump in, but not before the 21st, because
No,
no
no, yeah.
recommendations will be made, but in the
Right.
future, yes, correct.
Yeah, yeah, okay, I just want to make sure I was understanding that process.
For
Thanks.
sure.
Right, yep.
Are we
Anybody
gonna
else?
set the date today, of the whatever meeting we want to get together, before the 21st to discuss?
Yeah, because that's next
That's next Monday, Wednesday.
Next Wednesday. Let's see, how is everybody's availability?
It's poor.
Generally in the evenings, I'm pretty good. So the standard during the week, 6 or 7 o'clock timeframe. I mean, if we got to do something, I hate to recommend the weekend, but if we got to do something, I don't know if that's an option, but if we got to do that, then I can try and flex and figure something out. But I'll be as flexible as I can be.
Weekends is actually better for me. Helps. Monday, Tuesday is college drop-off, so I'll be fairly inaccessible even via Zoom.
And crying.
And yes, I will not be, it won't be pretty.
Yeah.
Derek, is there a prohibition to us having a public meeting, or a special meeting, rather, so it would be a special meeting on a weekend?
Nope, you can do it.
I couldn't do weekend, you either.
Okay, well,
Should we check with Eric?
we have to check with Eric
Yeah.
first, but we'll definitely get the date out there.
Okay.
We'll have,
The only thing I would caution is that if you were gonna have a meeting Saturday morning, for instance, at 10 a.m., right? You would need to have that special meeting agenda
Tomorrow.
posted with the town clerk by 10 a.m. tomorrow.
That's
So
24 hours advance notice published.
Likewise, if it was on Sunday at 10 a.m., it would still need to be posted with the town clerk by 10 a.m. tomorrow. And also, the
On
town
Friday.
clerk's office closes at noon on Friday.
So they
Or
close
1
at,
o'clock.
1 o'clock, I think.
they close at 1 p.m. Okay.
well, the commission will collaborate on picking out a date and making sure we get it to public notice.
Don't let me stop you from
Out there.
doing it Monday or Tuesday. If I can Zoom in, I will, but
Okay,
I'll be in motion.
all right, we'll pick a date. Today's Thursday. Okay. Any other public comment? Okay.
Motion to adjourn?
All right, thank you, everybody.